Hell will be cold when all the fire is gone.
Listen to the wind. The fuel that fires the imagination. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Carried on a breeze spanning eons. Inhaled at first, exhaled at last. One moment here, the next, gone. Into thin air.
Queen Ophelia Droxine Oberon was restless as always. Exile on the harsh desert world of Niobe Four was a far cry from the grandeur of Imperius Prime, at least the homeworld such as it was. How she chose to remember. Of course, as ruler of the Imperium, Ophelia visited plenty of inhospitable worlds, some of which even more hostile than Niobe, though only in a transitory capacity, a brief sojourn, long enough to broker a truce between two warring civilizations, or perhaps tour and provide disaster assistance in the wake of an asteroid strike, carry out the responsibilities of her position, and then, when all is said and done, return home. Here now, she is a castaway, annihilated during a failed assassination attempt more than one solar year ago. The family Acropolis on Imperius Prime is a crumbled ruin, and the Queen essentially banished to one of the darker corners of her kingdom, albeit of her own free will. Hidden out of necessity for her safety and taken in like a runaway child, Ophelia resides here in the deep desert with her reinstated senior aeronaut and wingman, Captain Nix Orlan. Still, with all that she has been forced to give up and do without, this new life has not robbed her completely of every simple pleasure. One of those experiences, in particular, a very new and exhilarating indulgence for her, for someone who has spent the better part of a young life tied down by the bonds of pomp and circumstance. Freedom.
Nix, can you hear me?
Ophelia voiced into the comm as she banked over hard right, sending her ship hurling between the craggy walls of a deep gorge.
Loud and clear, Red.
Orlan confirmed.
How's she handling?
She?
The Queen responded, scoffing.
She is just fine, Captain. Oh, but wait. Are you referring to the ship? I guess I didn't know that she was a she. Yes, she is handling quite nicely. The addition of a nose cone does not seem to interfere with the aerodynamics of the design at all.
Good to hear.
Nix replied.
Go ahead and wring her out some more. Make sure the glue and tape is going to hold in place.
Ophelia giggled.
Oh, now, Captain. Give Plex a little more credit than that. He's quite the talented mechanic after all.
He's quite something, I'll give you that.
Nix quipped.
Though exactly what that something is, it sort of eludes me.
The Ionian fighter thundered out of the gorge, across a vast plain that stretched out into the distance, on course toward a gargantuan volcanic vent that loomed over the valley like a smoldering colossus belching fire and brimstone and drooling, searing streams of bubbling orange magma from its ragged maw.
Hey, Beetlejuice. I'm assuming you're aware that your current trajectory is going to take you straight up the side of Ebonite Mons, yeah?
Ophelia grinned playfully.
Straight up and over, Rocket Man. Keep me on your sensors. I'm going to test out the heat tolerance of the new nose cone. Make sure Plex is ready to take readings.
I don't think Plex would have wanted you to fly close to an active volcano to analyze the hull metal. It's fine, Ophelia. Come on home and I'll fix breakfast. Danubian geekle eggs. Your favorite.
Crack 'em and scramble 'em, Orlan. This won't take long.
Ophelia closed the channel then and focused her complete attention on her flight path. Niobe's one and only active volcano was the largest in the entire galactic neighborhood, and certainly more than capable of wiping all life from the planet should it ever unleash a full-scale eruption. Fearless to the nth degree, the Queen lit up the ship's powerful afterburners and roared into a writhing wall of superheated vapor, then pulled back hard on the control stick as she followed up the blackened curvature of the flank on her way up toward the vent. Lava flows boiled in massive, tumbling columns on either side of Ophelia's wingtips, reshaping the landscape along the way in real time, several times making it necessary for her to fire off multiple bursts from her ion cannons to clear a way through. And then, finally, she reached the summit, flying, unflinching, into the pitch-black ash cloud above the crater. At the precise moment that the starfighter crossed into the ejection, Ophelia's signature tracking blip disappeared from Orlan's scope.
Beetlejuice, goddammit, where the hell are you?
Nix already knew the answer to his own question, redundant other than a desperate plea to re-establish contact. The ash cloud that fanned out above the crater of Ebonite Mons was more than 800,000 meters across and carried with it enough electromagnetic disturbance to scramble even the most powerful sensor tracking system. She was in there all right. Now, she was on her own. Now, she would have to find her own way home.
Finding a way home. Not an easy task once the only home you've ever known is gone. Set adrift into an infinite sea of darkness, Queen Ophelia Droxine Oberon remains at large, a castaway, lost in a sea of question marks that are, even now, one by one, vanishing into a quagmire of relentlessly expanding dark matter. The Imperium is dying, unless something can be done soon. All energy and light will be forever lost, and subsequently, all life. This is a universe on the brink of thin air.
Nix had taken a sacred oath long, long ago to protect the House of Oberon. Now he felt as though he had single-handedly been at fault for allowing a circumstance leading to the untimely demise of Ophelia, the last of the lineage. No tracking signal on the sensor, nothing but cruel static modulation hissing dispassionately over his comm. Ophelia had flown into the ash cloud several anxious minutes ago, and now the fearless Nix Orlan is shaken to his core. Like a suit of armor held together by a singular bolt, the very reason for his return to the service may have just now been unceremoniously snuffed out of existence in a flaming cloud of superheated energy. Ironic, considering that the overriding concern for the kingdom, and subsequently the universe at large, is the steady decline of energy, the catastrophic rise of entropy. Just as the gravity of the situation started sinking in with absolute undeniable earnest, Orlan's comm finally crackled to life.
Hey, Flyboy. Tell your bot that I'm recommending his handiwork to the Ionian shipworks. That is, if there still exists an Ionian shipworks. Ophelia Oberon on final approach, requesting permission to land.
With a tear of joy and overwhelming sigh of relief, Nix collapsed backwards into his command chair and closed his eyes.
Permission granted, Your Highness. Come on home.
With a light-hearted retort, Ophelia giggled over the comm and exclaimed,
Your Highness? Oh, wow. Nix, you sound worried. Were you worried about me? Oh, that's so sweet.
Nix rolled his eyes.
I'm never going to hear the end of this, am I? You're more fearless and impulsive than I am, young lady,
he replied.
It scares me sometimes.
You really are happy to hear from me, aren't you?
Exuberant.
Orlan admitted, wiping the anxious sweat from his brow.
After surviving that little stunt, I decided to show you a little more respect.
I've learned from the best, Captain.
Ophelia assured him.
It's all just your expert tutelage in action. Lighten up, old man. Take a deep breath and try to relax. This is Oberon, over and out.
Nix closed his eyes and smiled. Outwardly, he was genuinely concerned for the Queen's safety. Beneath the facade, however, Orlan beamed with pride.
She's a force to be reckoned with.
He said to himself,
Perhaps the most formidable Oberon of them all.
Plex had completed his modifications to Ophelia's Ionian starfighter the night before, essentially what amounted to a precisely engineered and fitted nose cone to protect the central tachyon nacelle from dust and grime buildup while flying above and through Niobe's sandy, windswept surface. As the twin turbines started winding down and Ophelia released the canopy, the old automaton shuffled out into the bright morning sunlight and said,
"Welcome back, Queen Oberon. I trust my modifications to your vessel were satisfactory."
Ophelia climbed out on the wing, removed and placed her helmet on the seat of the craft, and then jumped down to the ground near where Plex was standing.
Quite sufficient, my good man.
She responded.
Though please, Plex, let's dispense with the pleasantries. All this expression of respectfulness is making my head so big, I fear I shall not be able to go on fitting it through the cockpit opening. First, Captain Orlan. And now you? I may be the Empress of the known universe, but here in this place, I am clearly among friends. Ophelia will do. Or perhaps, just between the two of us, I might convince you to use my nickname, something my father used to call me when I was very, very young.
Clutching 2 handfuls of her crimson locks, she added,
Not Beetlejuice, for God's sake. Orlan's term of endearment makes me want to scream. Does my head remind you of a red giant star as well?
Before Plex had a chance to voice his mechanized opinion, she said,
Call me Drox. It's short for Droxine.
One of the servos in the robot's tarnished metal neck whirred softly as he tilted his head inquisitively.
A nickname seems largely inadequate for an Empress,
He stated matter-of-factly.
especially when coming from a mere faithful subject such as myself. Are you certain?
Ophelia stepped up and wrapped both hands around one of Plex's metal alloy armatures and smiled.
Of course I'm certain. We're friends, Plex.
She responded,
The best of friends. You will remember that now, won't you?
Plex's shimmering blue optical sensors seemed to beam just a little bit brighter.
I have added your nickname to my data reference archive, Your Majesty. From this point forward, you shall be known as Drox.
Orlan's Trilnat symbiont had adapted quite well to a considerably different way of life back on the home world of Niobe Four. Helix, as he had come to be known, was welcomed into the fold, essentially having full access to the comforts of a human lifestyle and to the wondrously advanced technology therein. Now, the fist-sized arachnoid was spending a great deal of time in Orlan's observatory, studying and learning all that he could about the vast universe beyond what had once been a rather limited perspective, deep in the tunnels of his subterranean realm. It was the sharing of minds with Orlan that had first unveiled this new reality. Ever since he had been old enough to do so, Helix had ventured up from the sandy depths of his hive to wonder at the shimmering pinpoints of light above. In the end, it was this new perspective that sparked what was quickly becoming an insatiable curiosity and a desire to share all of this newfound knowledge with others of his kind. The night after Nix and Ophelia tested the changes to the Queen's spacecraft, the Trilnat made his decision. Once Oberon and Orlan had retired to their respective sleeping quarters for the night, Helix skittered out into the drifting sand, en route back to the hive.
It will be strange,
He thought.
returning to my tribe after so much time has passed. It does lead one to wonder whether or not I will be remembered at all.
Helix's hive was a great distance away from Orlan's remote outpost, and it was going to take some time for him to reach it. Nix would have most likely provided passage for him via rover or spacecraft, but then this was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and he'd waited long enough. Conversations with his symbiont required a physical connection, while Orlan was sleeping, and out of respect for the human's seemingly fatigued condition, the Trilnat decided to set out on his own. Kindleco Blix finished downloading her consciousness to her new synthetic body and then sat up in the cybernetic preservation cocoon and waited while her eyes adjusted to the light. She would miss her previous persona and who she had been before, but then this was a significant upgrade. Bioengineered flesh as opposed to synthetic covering over metal alloy framework. Essentially organic now in every detail, down to the finite synapses of tissue akin to that which make up the intricate convolutions of the human brain, certainly as close as she could possibly come to being human. Peeling herself free of the organic goo that had protected and preserved the body while in storage, Koblix threw her new legs over the lip of the cocoon shell and stood up. The incredible variety of unexpected sensations was somewhat overwhelming at first. The feel of her feet against the soft polymer floor, the smell of biopreservatives that permeated the room. Her sight, no longer impaired by flickering digital signals and pixelated visual artifacts associated with the optical cameras that had provided eyesight to her previous mechanical self. Said self-obliterated more than a year ago, vaporized in the explosion that was intended to assassinate Queen Oberon. Stepping up to a strategically placed mirror, Kindle examined her body with satisfaction and then turned and made her way to the shower chamber to rinse herself off. Even the feel of water spraying down on her skin and pouring in warm rivulets down the curving contours of new anatomy was thoroughly intoxicating.
I'm going to enjoy this iteration of Kindle Koblix,
she voiced aloud and then hesitated. The voice, her voice, was different. Strikingly different. No longer modulated like before, Kindle knew logically that these vocal cords would make her speech sound alien to her.
A whole new me,
she said.
Unexpected, yet a rather effective disguise as I begin my investigation into the plot to kill Queen Oberon.
This process is tedious.
Triviod lamented.
And the time is at hand. Than, hear me. We emerged in this universe to initiate a process, not to commit our combined existence to it forevermore. Eternity is a very, very long time. Much too long to spend it unnecessarily, endlessly extinguishing the singular fires one by one. You know what we must now do.
Than sat contemplating his sister's words from the altar of his Church of Darkness.
You overlook the process, Triviod. For as much as you covet your precious sight, you fail to see the brushstrokes that are painting our collective masterpiece. You are far too impatient. What you interpret as my weakness is, in fact, a counterbalance to your impetuosity. Like it or not, we cannot afford to become reckless. Invasion, in all of its many guises, is best implemented quietly, covertly, coursing out across space and time like a cancer. What begins as a single cell in the bloodstream of the cosmos will ultimately become irreversible, malignant. The patient will die, my restless twin. The prognosis is already terminal. Meanwhile, it is our task to break the news to the universal family, gently. Convince them all to give up and give in, preferably without a fight. This church of ours that has been constructed in the ashes of House Oberon is our platform to set the stage. When the curtain is raised and the horde is revealed and set loose, our minions of dark matter will be seen by the audience as inevitable, greeted by thunderous applause as the darkness sweeps them all away. World conquerors can become fools, dear sister, but fools rarely become world conquerors.
Triviod rolled her cherished eyes.
So theatrical, Than.
She chided.
When the final act of your consummate production has been played out, let us hope that it shall be as universally well received as you anticipate. In the cosmic scheme of things, darkness and light are diametric, as are good and evil. You and I are now the personification of all that these people fear, convincing them to follow us into chaos, essentially into hell? I'm not so sure, brother. In my experience, this universe is particularly fond of happy endings. They live out their lives, believing that the show must go on. You are trying to convince them all otherwise. Release the Horde, Than. Finish what we started, and to hell with how it is perceived.
Than sighed heavily and stood up to light a candelabra on the altar as his black-robed congregation started filing one by one into the chapel.
You flirt with reckless disregard,
he told her.
There is no room for a random element. Just as a play has its villains, so too does it have its heroes. If we are not meticulous, dear Triviad, we may find that the lights will still come up when the last line is delivered and our story is at an end.
Orlan absent-mindedly stood up out of bed and then shuffled his way across the room to a fluid recycling faucet built into the wall. Carelessly splashing 2 handfuls of water across his face, he managed to stave off the lingering vestiges of sleep just enough to find his way down the passage leading to the food preparation bay. There, at a table near the center of the room, was Plex, already seated, holding a cup of freshly brewed coffee in his outstretched metal hand, still piping hot via the heating element built into the robot's palm.
Good morning, Captain. Hello. How do you do?
Plex exclaimed unenthusiastically.
I trust you had a satisfactory sleep cycle.
Nix grabbed the cup and took several sips, then sat down with a thud and exhaled a heavy sigh.
It would seem so.
Nix responded.
Considering the nail-biting ordeal that Beetlejuice put me through yesterday.
Drox.
Plex corrected.
I understand that Queen Oberon does not appreciate that you have likened her cephalon to a star that is dying and has swollen to many times its original size. Apparently King Ivus used to call her Drox when she was a child. She is particularly fond of that.
Orlan chuckled.
That's precisely why I call her Beetlejuice. I'm fully aware that it gets under her skin. That's not all it does. It also keeps her on her toes. For that reason alone, I don't see a need to coddle her. Here, now. She needs to be as tough and as immovable as an Imperial force field. As unstoppable as a supernova. If she's pissed off at me, or at anything, she can use that anger to bring focus and clarity to the mission at hand. Namely, her return to the throne of the Imperium.
Nix stood up and patted Plex on his corroded cadmium shoulder plate.
Once that mission has been accomplished, I'd be more than happy to call her Drox.
Orlan crossed the room to a porthole and looked out at the drifting sand. An errant notion interrupted and redirected his train of thought.
Daddy Longlegs didn't come skittering through my nightmares last night. Up in the observatory as usual.
Plex rotated his optical sensors in Nix's direction.
The Trillnat is no longer present within the confines of the residence, Captain. I registered its absence shortly after power-up. Out for an extended walkabout, perhaps.
Nix's brow furrowed.
You power up around 0400, yeah?
Plex nodded.
At precisely 0400.
It's 0900 now.
Nix observed.
5 hours is quite a walkabout. Take a look outside for me, would you, Plex? See if you can spot him on your long-range sensors. I'm sure he's fine. Just seems out of character for my elusive symbiont Spider-Man. He's good at hiding, but typically doesn't wander too much further than an antenna's reach away.
Of course, Triviod preferred the darkness, in fact gravitated to it like a moth to a flame. But then it was the light that provided her with a means to lust. And lust, whenever or however the opportunity presented itself, had become her particular brand of addiction. The confrontations with Than were becoming quite frequent, and the resulting agitation in the wake of these disputes made her seethe with anger and internalized frustration at his unwillingness to initiate the final stages of the invasion. Rather than allowing these feelings to linger and further cloud her judgment and resolve, Triviod found other ways to vent her growing resentment for the simpering, misguided fool that was her so-called brother. Here on Imperius Prime, chaos and uncertainty were now the order of the day. The destruction of the Acropolis and subsequent disappearance of the Queen had thrown the Imperium into complete disarray, a situation allowing much of the more sinister elements of society to flourish, especially here on the streets and thoroughfares of Capella. Triviod reveled in this fact, indeed felt more at home in the pathways leading to debauchery than she did channeling her energies into furthering the mission. And so here she was, stepping off a public transport shuttle into the aptly named Sector Erotic, a simmering cauldron of perversion, dark alleys and garish neon-adorned sex shops offering everything from alien intercourse to virtual orgies and any conceivable taboo in between. It was into this cesspool that Triviod was now casually walking, unflinching and knowing full well that her recently acquired captive body was almost immediately drawing attention from any and all that she happened to sashay by.
Hello, baby.
Said body, a particularly apropos specimen for the business at hand, a Rheonian dolphy, the very name of the species translating into essentially sex personified. Dressed to kill, in a manner of speaking, Triviod strutted down the street, wearing only an indigo bustier, satin side-slit miniskirt, stockings, garters and wedge open-toe heels, making her way toward a cluster of far from nondescript anti-gravity limousines that lined the dingy, litter-strewn curbside ahead.
This should be entertaining,
she thought as she stepped up to the nearest limo and leaned her elbows on the doorframe. Almost immediately, the tinted transparent force field window flickered and faded away, revealing a sharply dressed yet grossly overweight man seated inside, chewing on the spent stub of an undoubtedly expensive cigar.
Well, well. Hello there, gorgeous. Lonely tonight.
The man was outwardly loathsome and disgusting beneath his finely tailored suit, obviously wealthy, even important perhaps. No matter. She wasn't selling this body to the night. Triviod wasn't interested in monetary gain. She didn't care what the life form looked like. By now, she'd bedded plenty of horrific creatures, far more awful and disgusting than this one. All he needed to be was horny and aroused. To her, he was just another lump of flesh with the appropriate accoutrements to satisfy her needs. She would allow him to take his pleasure with this voluptuous body, see him ravage it, use it up completely, and then finally, when the encounter had fully run its course, watch as these borrowed hands crushed his skull to bloody crimson pulp. Yes, this was going to be a rush.
Very, very lonely,
she replied.
I need a ride. Do you think you could take me all the way?
The man grinned.
To the stars, gorgeous. All the way up and back down again.
The door to the craft slid open with a muffled hiss and retracted into the chassis, and Triviod bent over seductively, climbed inside, and straddled the man's lap.
To the stars,
she repeated.
I'm ready to quench your fire.
Finding his way back to the hive was never an issue for Helix, no more so than the ceaseless, blistering heat that was beating down relentlessly on top of his glistening black cephalothorax. No, Helix was a native desert dweller, and as such took all of these inhospitable conditions in stride. Niobe's environmental nuances were quite commonplace in his experience, and after untold centuries of Niobean evolution had rendered him impervious to even the very worst that the desert could deal out. Navigating the pathways of shifting sand by way of instinct rather than line of sight, the Trilnat skittered as fast as his perfectly synchronized 8 spindly legs could carry him across flat, sun-baked plateaus, around and through vast stretches of windswept canyons, until finally, after several cycles of daylight and night, he arrived on the outskirts of his destination. He didn't just accidentally stumble upon it either. The incredible array of interconnected tunnels that make up a Trilnat hive all eventually span out to singular burrows, sentries that keep constant watch from the frontier in case of potential threat or danger to the colony. Helix knew exactly how and where to find the nearest one of these, effectively concealed and most likely well-guarded openings. The carefully woven trapdoor would have been absolutely invisible to most if not all desert travelers, save one, a trill gnat. Helix cautiously extended the tip of a single claw-tipped tarsus against the web fibers that held the circular construction of sand, dirt and web together and tapped ever so lightly upon the surface. It wouldn't take much, just the slightest vibration, to alert the underlying trill gnat that something had wandered far too close to the opening and would now have to be dealt with in some manner, lethal or otherwise. Helix would only be granted one chance to communicate his intention before the Guardian impaled him with the same deadly stinger that he himself possessed. If this were to happen, either before he could touch the end of the other trill gnat's antennae or worse, sting the other arachnoid himself in a brief scuffle, this return trip to his hive would be over very, very quickly indeed. One tap, then two. All at once, the trapdoor sprang aside long enough for the nimble creature on the other side to lunge out, legs extended, ready and waiting to capture the intruder in what would undoubtedly be an inescapable death grip. Helix skittered clear just in time and brushed a singular antenna across the others, establishing a split-second melding of minds. It wasn't a word or even a string of words that passed between the two, but rather a notion, clear as crystal, a recognition of kindred energies that caused the Guardian trill gnat to unfurl the attack stance and stumble headlong into the sand. Righting itself, the Guardian arachnid turned and instantly assumed a defensive posture. Now, understand, trill gnats do not identify as singular individuals. The species function in the wilds of Niobe as a hive mind, single cells in a vast collective brain. For Helix to identify himself by name would have been meaningless to his unsuspecting counterpart, and so he had sent a signal that only a trill gnat would interpret and immediately comprehend, the one individual with a singular identity, Colarus Endymion, deity, to the trill gnat race. Slowly, tentatively, the Guardian leaned forward and extended both antennae toward Helix in a gesture of recognition. Helix responded in kind. Though these two trill gnats had never actually encountered each other face to face before, there could be no doubt that they shared a common bond.
I have been away,
Helix offered,
far off across the sands, and further still before that, into the darkness above. I have traveled to places never before seen or even imagined by our kind. To the tiny lights that beckon to us in the night, I now see and understand much that has, until now, remained incomprehensible because of our isolation from humankind. I wish to impart this new knowledge to the hive. I wish to enlighten our legions with an understanding of the worlds beyond our own. Will you permit me to pass back into the collective consciousness?
The other arachnid hesitated, carefully brushing his sensitive antennae receptors together to enhance the clarity of the telepathic link.
You are unknown, yet familiar. You are of the body and permission is granted, brother. Go below, rejoin the hive, and share this knowledge you now possess. Know this, however.
The Guardian warned.
Much has happened since your departure. The time is upon us. The prophecy fulfilled. A singular immaculate egg has been unearthed deep in the darkest catacomb below our central tunnels. It is said that the life within is awakening. Perhaps your return from these outer worlds is a sign to us all. Perhaps you are a messenger, preparing a way for the birth of Colarus Endymion. You invoked this name as key. I see this as no coincidence. Go in peace, brother. Return now, so that through you, we shall be prepared.
Nix and Ophelia wasted no time suiting up in preparation to initiate a search for Helix. The enigmatic arachnoid had been gone for several days now, and though the Queen still hadn't quite managed to become accustomed to his appearance, she appreciated and accepted the symbiotic significance of what he shared with her trusted aeronaut. As the pair made their way out to the flight line, to the end of the launch gantry platform, where both of the Ionian starfighters were kept at the ready, a curious aerial phenomenon emerged from a thick cloud bank overhead.
That's an Imperial shuttle.
Ophelia observed as she squinted into the sunlight.
House Oberon configuration.
Nix looked up and watched a sleek winged spacecraft as it performed a wide arcing maneuver that seemed to be placing it on a direct trajectory to the grounds near his outpost.
Friend or foe?
He asked, glancing over at Ophelia.
Shall I let it land or tell Plex to blast it out of the sky?
Let's not be too hasty, Captain.
The Queen stated cautiously.
There's only one individual that is currently aware of our location, and she is not likely to divulge this information to anyone. Stand down for the moment. Plex doesn't need his itchy trigger phalange on the ion cannon just yet.
Whatever you say, Your Majesty, though not to err on the side of caution is ill-advised. At least let him establish a target lock. Put him in the crosshairs.
Ophelia started walking out into the desert near where the shuttle was now hovering and slowly descending to land.
Not to worry, my valiant aeronaut.
She voiced over her shoulder,
I have a feeling that this is one of the good guys. Additionally, I forgot to mention that this arrival had been scheduled in advance. By me.
Orlan followed after her then, still wary and ready at a moment's notice to place himself in a line of fire should the circumstance dictate. Hurriedly striding up next to her, Nix drew his trusty sidearm and held it at the ready.
I'm sorry if you think I'm overcompensating, but then someone used a multi-megaton antimatter particle to try to take you out of the equation. Not gonna happen again. Not on my watch.
I appreciate that you're looking after me, Captain.
Ophelia said, pretend punching his shoulder.
You are indeed my hero. Now lighten up.
She exclaimed as the shuttle hatch opened and a beautiful woman stepped out into the light.
And meet the new and improved Kindle Koblix.
Triviad awoke within the confines of her captive body, stretched out across a bed in some lavish downtown penthouse suite, exhausted and satisfied, at least for now. Turning her head to one side, she realized that hers was not the only body tangled up in the satin bedsheets. Resting motionless beside her was the lifeless, mutilated corpse of her evening's entertainment, his cold, pale epidermis bruised to a point beyond obscenity, and both eyes gouged out of blood-soaked hollow sockets. Sensing the presence of something entwined around the fingers and cupped in the palm of her outstretched hand, Triviad lifted her arm into view and saw that she held the eyeballs of her unfortunate victim, their optic nerves coiled like tangled crimson root fibers in between the bloodied digits. Then she heard herself scream, though not her exactly. It was the Rionian Dolphy, the girl whose life form she now occupied, reacting to the grisly sight now unfolding before her disbelieving eyes. Triviad had not killed her, merely taken possession of her exquisite corpus, allowing her to see, feel, and experience everything, helpless to stop all that was being done to her. Through the hijacked woman's hypersensitized nervous system, the Velgon could experience every sensation firsthand, whether or not her semi-conscious receptacle was consenting or not. In the end, the encounter had been brutal to all parties in attendance, the deceased perhaps, the fate most merciful of all. For Triviad, it had quelled her seething libido for a brief while anyway, long enough to clear her mind and begin to formulate a plan to circumvent Than's reluctance to finish what they started here in this pitiful alternate universe. Finished with this particular experience, Triviad allowed herself to be regurgitated from the Rionian's digestive tract, spewing out from her mouth and nose to drop in a vitreous puddle on the once pristine satin sheets. A disembodied eye surrounded by a writhing bundle of glistening tentacles.
She served me well.
Triviad thought to herself,
I will be merciful. Then again, she will survive to become the obvious suspect in this horrific murder.
Triviad chuckled.
Poor dear. After what she was forced to endure last night, I doubt seriously that she will be worth much to anyone anyway. Certainly, she won't be up for resisting arrest.
Pulling herself from the sticky vomit with a sickening squelch, the Velgun slithered across the bed and dropped to the floor, then hurriedly made her way back through the elaborate suite and out into a long, ornately decorated hallway, fleeing, as it were, the as-yet undiscovered scene of the crime. The tunnel ahead was dark and confining, radically different than what Helix had grown accustomed to, and certainly insignificant now that he knew and understood his place in the vast universe that spanned out beyond this tiny speck of sand that was called Niobe. Down and down, he scrambled into the depths, through the tenuous burrows glistening with crusted granules, held together from threat of collapse by nothing more than a thick coating of Trillnat worker secretions, a sticky mix of gossamer spun web and saliva. The tunnels were perfectly rounded and reasonably sturdy for the purposes they served, granting access to and from the planet's long-buried surface, far below the sand dunes to an extinct volcanic labyrinth that was home to the Trillnat race. Little by little, Helix started to encounter other Trillnats along the way, as junctions of interconnected tunnels branched off in all directions from this main thoroughfare that he knew was leading him straight to the heart of his own particular hive. Every once in a while, the antenna of another passing Trillnat would inadvertently brush against his own, causing a momentary interruption to his singular train of thought. Frustrating though it was, Helix knew that the effect was mutual, and so chose not to cloud his mind with ill will or annoyance. The last thing he wanted was to transmit irritation to the hive mind and spur resentment among his tribe, even before he had the chance to share the knowledge he had traveled all this way here to impart. Eventually, the flow of other hive citizenry increased from an occasional encounter to a steady stream. If he had felt a sense of claustrophobia before, now he folded his antenna receptors back across the crown of his head and crouched down between his legs, with his pedipalps across his face to fend off poking and prodding tarsi as burrows filled to capacity near the first of the extinguished volcanic vents, the entrance to the Trillnat's immense underground empire. There was a randomness to these ancient halls that Helix found strangely comforting, a belief shared by all Trillnats that this intricate latticework of caverns and tunnels had been prepared for them eons ago by Colorus Endymion, forged in an all-consuming fire that God alone could control. Now understand, there are no archaic texts or sacred tomes committed to print or chiseled in stone that serve to fuel Trillnat religious beliefs. While the species has developed formidable telepathic capabilities over time, Trillnat anatomical development has proved to be considerably limiting for written communication skills. Simply stated, not one of the arachnid's 8 spindly appendages are well suited for committing thoughts to paper or etching glyphs upon cavern walls. The collective religious beliefs shared by the entire race is held forever ingrained within the very fiber of the collective, a notion not of an individual's singular faith, but rather a combined knowledge woven into Trillnat society, stitches sewn into the fabric of the hive mind ever since the first arachnid stood erect and climbed up into the light of the harsh Niobean sun. Legend or basis, in fact, the thought persists that the origin of all Trillnats branch out from the hatchling of that first immaculate egg, the birth of Colorus Endymion. And now, apparently, there were murmurs among the hive of a discovery, a new egg uncovered in the deepest depths of the catacombs that was not gestated and laid to rest there by any Trillnat queen. The second coming of Colorus Endymion that is predicted to coincide with an unthinkable catastrophic event. A foretelling that the Niobean sun, the giver of life, would be extinguished.
It is imperative, Captain Orlan, that we locate your Trillnat symbiont immediately. While I was en route to Niobe, I was, of course, continually monitoring subspace galactic news services. Something in particular caught my attention and has been troubling me ever since.
Queen Oberon and Captain Orlan listened intently in the briefing room of Koblix's Imperial starliner, the Solari Dionysus, as she related an interesting development that had just filtered into her cybernetic consciousness across the myriad chatter of stories throughout the Imperium. This one, in particular, concerning a seemingly insignificant homicide, the murder of the Capellan officer of Metropolitan Efficiency. The news item was of a rather predictable circumstance, the hapless official wandering into Capella's infamous sector erotic in search of a little company for the night. In and of itself barely notable except for a rather interesting detail, a distinct similarity to a previously unsolved crime, the deaths of the pilot and co-pilot of the Esper Hyperion, the delegate transport ship from Neltet 6. Koblix continued.
The autopsy result in both cases indicated the presence of elevated levels of dark matter at a subatomic level in both the bloodstreams of the Starliner crew and subsequently a sex trade worker from Capella, a Rionian Dolphy identified as Chlora Alifari. It would seem that all of this may coincide with your attempted assassination, Your Majesty. It is my considered opinion that a parasitic organism of some kind may be at work, a creature capable of invading and taking possession of a body, a host, if you will, forcing the unwitting subject to submit to the bidding of the parasite. First, Esper Hyperion pilot and co-pilot. Next, the Notation delegates. And now this.
Ophelia looked confused.
I fail to see the correlation. Dark matter is present in all living things, Kindle. Although,
she went on,
Nix and I have observed and documented an increase of dark matter in and around extinguished stars. If you recall, the delegates from Neltet 6 came before me to request the creation of an order of entropy, a religion based upon the gradual running down of the stars. Are you then hypothesizing that this parasite is in fact precipitating an end to our existence? And doing so covertly by possessing other life forms to advance their agenda? My God, Kindle, who or what are they? Where in the bloody hell do they come from?
Nix stood up from his chair at the table and started pacing nervously around the room.
Hell may be right, Ophelia. If these parasites are some kind of organism made up of dark matter, and if they have the ability to possess other living beings to do their bidding, demons by any other name, fallen angels from some nether region here to end all goodness and light.
Precisely, Captain.
Koblix confirmed.
It seems as though an invasion force has been at work here for some time. Strange that they bothered to come before you, milady, to ask your permission to start what is essentially a covert war against the citizens of Light. Whether or not you had endorsed the plan, they sought audience with you for a singular purpose. To impart the amulet, and in doing so, seal your fate, order to chaos with nothing to stand in their way.
Excellent bit of deduction, my trusted handmaiden.
Ophelia exclaimed.
It is a fortuitous circumstance to have you back at my side.
It's good to be back, Your Majesty,
Kindle replied respectfully. Orlan stopped pacing and leaned on the backrest of an empty chair across from Koblix.
There's still one important detail you've left out. How does Helix figure into all this?
Kindle leaned forward and rested her chin in the palm of her hand.
Your symbiont may hold the key to understanding what we're up against, Captain Orlan. You see, the Rionian Dolphy, Miss Alifari, did not die in the ordeal. She is now in a coma and on life support. It is highly unlikely that she will ever awaken again. However, she is still registering extremely weak synaptic activity, just enough that a native telepath may be capable of reaching into what is left of her thoughts and discover who or what has done this to her.
Nix hung his head.
That remains to be seen. Trillnet symbiotic connections with those outside their race are somewhat rare, to say the least. As I'm sure you're aware, Helix and I may very well be the first. That said, I have to find him among a million others just like him. He's down there somewhere below us, down under untold tons of sand and rock. I can't reach out to him from up here.
The ship-wide intercom interrupted the tension in the briefing room imposed by Orlan's observation.
Madam Koblix.
The voice of the pilot stated,
We have arrived at the specified coordinates, awaiting your permission to land.
I wouldn't.
Orlan exclaimed.
If you set us down here, odds are your majestic starliner Solari Dionysus will sink into history, and with it, all hope for the Queen's Imperium. That sand down there is riddled with trillnat burrows. Drop me off and go find someplace stable to set down. I'll take it from here.
Very well, Captain.
Koblix responded.
We'll leave this task to you. Do try to find your symbiont in short order, though. I'm not sure how much longer our patient can survive on life support. Her condition is quite fragile.
Understood.
Orlan replied.
No guarantees. There are millions upon millions of lethal arachnids down in those tunnels, and I have to find the only one of them who knows who I am. The one who won't sting first and ask questions later. If this works, I'll let you know. If not, the Queen will need to determine an alternate course of action. Either way, we'll figure this out.
As Nix tapped the touchpad to open the hatch, Ophelia leaped from her chair and flung herself into his arms.
You're already my hero, old man. There's no need for you to go on proving it to me. Find Helix. Come back to me. I need a trusted aeronaut, not a fallen idol. Please, Nix. Do take care.
Nix smiled back at her, a cocky little sideways grin that made the crow's feet wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepen.
I'm your wingman, Beetlejuice. That's all that I am. Everything I was ever meant to be. To your dad. To you. As for all that hero shit, that's not me. Heroes. They don't typically live this long, Your Majesty. I'm just an old star pilot doing my job, watching out for you and making my way in the cosmos.
Ophelia loosened her grip and let him go so he could step through the egress opening.
All this, and modesty as well. Good luck, Captain. I shall be anxiously awaiting your return.
Me too.
Orlan exclaimed as he jumped a short distance down into the sand.
Keep the tachyon drive on standby. I won't be long.
Processus tenebrarum, the process of darkness, the rite of entropy. The ritual itself has existed since before the dawn of time. Time, in this universe, that is. Before the point at which a unit of measure had been used to track the continuous progression of existence. In that regard, long before the notion of an irreversible continuation from past, through present, into future. Yet time is a construct of this universe. For Than, this measure, used to sequence the flow of events across a material reality, was totally alien and utterly useless. These beings regard time as a tangible fourth dimension, a rather rudimentary belief in something used as a benchmark for tracking the process of birth, life, and death. Thankfully, they are now, each of them, little by little, being instructed otherwise. As Than's disciples slowly filed into the sanctuary and formed a semicircle around the central chancel, he raised the arms of his captive body high above his head and called out,
"My brothers and sisters in darkness, hear my voice calling out to you in the midst of what is now inevitable. Behold, at last, the way through which you may all be released from the shackles of relentless light. This,"
he exclaimed,
"is the blight that prevents you from knowing the truth."
Cupped in the palm of his hand, Than used a tiny device to activate a brilliant holographic display that instantly flared in midair and encompassed the entire altar, the projection of a massive flaming orb, a star, somewhere out in the black depths of space. The intense light that now permeated the room revealed that each of the followers held a metallic black mask clutched tightly against their collective chests, a strangely abstract shape, that of a face devoid of the familiar contours that should have defined a signature feature, a set of eyes.
"You believe only that which you can see."
Than went on.
"I tell you now, there is another way, another reality that cannot be realized or attained through sight. Your eyes betray you. Your vision, enslaved by reliance upon the light, deceives you. This universe, and all who exist herein, must evolve, transition to a new reality, a new perception of all that is, all that will ever be. Energy and light are corruptible, extinguishable. The darkness is eternal. The darkness endures Now, my brethren, hear my supplication and obey. Take from me that which blinds me from the truth, my sight, the light, deceivers to all that I am destined to become. I now cast off this burden so that I might see and understand. Only in darkness can I be enlightened. Only in darkness does my essence remain. Only in darkness can I be saved. Through entropy, from oblivion, forevermore.
En masse, all but one in attendance around the sanctuary raised the identical masks to their faces and pressed them into place, obscuring each individual's unique identity. Seconds later, cries of pain filled the room as optic neutralizers inside the masks ignited in unison, instantaneously vaporizing the eyeballs of the congregation while simultaneously cauterizing the inflicted damage. The masks, now fused to flesh and unremovable, had transformed these beings into unwitting participants in a holy war of darkness against light. One by one, Than stepped down from the chancel and made his way around to the newly blinded members of his flock and laid hands upon each of them. Beneath his touch, a subtle transference, conscious tendrils of dark matter, Velgonian larvae that would take complete possession of these newly indoctrinated followers and give them all what he had vowed in his supplication: perception and awareness of all things devoid of light. His concentration focused upon completion of the Processus Tenebrarum rite. Than failed to notice a singular shadowy form inching around the periphery of the gathering, silently making her way to the edge of the altar where the gargantuan holographic sun still flickered and pulsated with luminous cadmium majesty. There was no way for him to know, even if her brother had noticed her movements, that Triviod had invaded the corruptible form of one of his followers and was now about to do what he was either unprepared or unwilling to do. Impulsive and reckless. Perhaps. Still, Triviod failed to see the harm in a simple nudge to help move things along. The star in question, the one upon the altar of darkness, would do nicely, she thought. Unimportant, really, just a pinpoint location on a star chart or official designation in the galactic registry. The distinction between this and all other points of light in the universe, from this moment forward, would be that this insignificant ball of plasma was about to become ground zero, a gateway through which she would usher in the Horde. Her movements barely noticeable from Than's vantage point, Triviod crept up behind the altar, beneath a tall vertical cylinder that extended up from the raised dais to vent out through the peak of the vaulted dome ceiling. All she need do was swipe a hand from the hologram image of the star to a capsule of intelligent dark matter at the base of the cylinder, a casing prepared far in advance to be launched like bait to an intended target, a lure to convey an irresistible scent, the place where the Velgon endgame would begin. The coordinates transferred and trajectory locked in, a single word materialized across a tiny control screen embedded in the side of the containment capsule shell, accompanied by several other bits of course data and estimated time to impact on the surface of the unfortunate star. It read simply, Niobe. Nix watched the Solari Dionysus glide off into the distance toward the nearest mountainous plateau until it was barely visible to him, then turned to face the desert flat upon which he stood. Quick examination of the immediate surface at his feet revealed the presence of 8 or 9 distinct Trilnat mounds, crusty piles of sand used by the arachnids to control temperature and humidity inside the uppermost stratum of the hive. His plan was simple enough to execute, albeit an absolute long shot for success. Carefully stepping around the largest mound to the center of the cluster of piles, Orlan treaded very lightly indeed, so as not to place too much weight on what he assumed to be a rather brittle surface, prone to collapse under the excess weight of more than a few of the tiny creatures that now skittered randomly to and fro around his boots. So far, at least, the Trillnats did not see him as a threat. Not, that is, until he commenced to lie down in the sand, with arms outstretched and closed eyes, preparing, as it were, to go to sleep. As he lay there in the warm sunlight, slowly nodding off, Nix considered the clear and present danger he was placing himself in. The only way he was going to locate Helix was by asking another Trillnat to go and find him. The only way to ask another Trillnat anything at all was to establish a telepathic link while sleeping. The risk? Orlan was symbiotically linked to only one arachnid mind, and even that, in the beginning, had been a somewhat unsettling experience. One spider creeping through your nightmares was more than enough. Now, he was laying himself open to an entire cluster. As the human lay there, unmoving and now seemingly unconscious, the scattered group of wary arachnids clung to their mounds of sand, waiting, watching through dark, lidless, almond-shaped eyes for any indication that this hapless creature had a death wish or was simply tired and in need of rest. Slowly, cautiously, a pair of Trillnats approached, then another, and another. Whether it was simply curiosity or something else entirely, it didn't take long before Nix was completely surrounded. Once it had been determined that this sleeping bipedal monstrosity was not going to awaken anytime soon, more of the eight-legged Niobians started climbing over one another and, like Gulliver and his captor Lilliputians, held him immobile beneath a tangle of intertwined legs as a silken blanket of thick webbing was woven to completely and more effectively restrain his arms, legs, and torso. Then, and only then, did the first tentative pair of antennae extend out, and then into Orlan's vulnerable brainstem. When the human did not stir from his slumber, more of the delicate receptors pricked the soft flesh of Orlan's neck and proceeded to enter the wispy corridors of his unfettered and unprotected thoughts. Instantly, these telepathic intruders knew that this individual was called Nix Orlan. In very short order, they became aware of everything about him and why he was here now, placing himself completely and most certainly at the mercy of their overwhelmingly lethal, venom-laden stingers.
Dear God!
Nix cried out in his mind.
So many fucking Trillnats. It's a wonder you all fit here inside my gray convolutions. Oh well, no time to argue over squatters' rights. I'm here to find my friend, a Trillnat from this hive that goes by the name of Helix.
The shadowy forms that now haunted Nix's brain didn't seem to respond at all. Outwardly, the name meant nothing to the cluster of individuals. However, all, now including Nix himself, were interconnected and joined to the hive mind. In that moment, Orlan became a member of the Trillnat collective, and by way of this incredible expanse of shared consciousness, was able to easily reach out to Helix, and thereby inform him that his help was now urgently needed. Silas Van Corvin, the Governor Supreme of planet Neltet 6, had received the encoded communique from Kindle Co-Blix several months ago, and had yet to decide how he should respond. Not that the message had been accusatory, simply that his own investigation was still ongoing and unsolved here upon the homeworld. The terribly disturbing nature and modus operandi surrounding the untimely deaths of planetary delegates Amber and Corona Chromaticus, and the seeming connection between this double homicide and the obliteration of House Oberon on Imperius Prime. Because the bodies of the delegates had been incinerated near the scene of the assassination attempt, no autopsy could be used to prove or disprove the question of guilt. Surely, he thought, one must not be overly hasty in this matter, a crime committed in which two Neltatian natives are considered to be the prime suspects. Prime suspects in a plot, apparently an insidious coup to overthrow the ruler of the known universe. The only indisputable fact has been that, at least for the time being, no motive has been established for a Neltatian perpetrator. Relations with the House of Oberon have never wavered. Closest allies, far before the reign of King Ivis.
Radio silence is apt to arouse suspicion,
he stated quietly to himself.
But I must know how and why citizenry from Neltet 6 were selected and targeted to be the patsies.
Van Corvin piled his tall blue rail-thin form out of his senior inspector's transport under a steady rain upon arrival outside the Criminal Investigation Bureau.
Appropriate,
he stated grimly as he focused his gaze up into the cloud-shrouded steel-grey sky overhead.
For the business at hand, grisly such as it is.
Hesitating just long enough to exhale a heavy sigh, the governor sloshed his way up a wide flight of stone steps leading inside, and then swiped his gaunt, oversized indigo palm across the Bureau's security kiosk. From the lobby down a long corridor to a cold stainless steel doorway at the end, the Ministry of Wrongful Death Research. MWDR, as it was widely recognized throughout the Imperium, perhaps the most respected forensic science division of its kind in existence. Crimes from the far reaches of the Imperium were investigated here. Not once had these expert researchers been called upon to sift through the fibers of a murder committed on his tranquil home world, Van Corvin lamented. It was for this reason that he now found it so difficult to believe that any Neltatian could even so much as be implicated. Crime was not in Neltatian nature.
All right, Doctor,
the governor said.
This isn't a cold case just yet. Let's open up the containment cooler and have another look.
As you wish, Governor, though it is interesting to note that the material has changed since your last visit. Undergone some kind of mutation, even as the evidence has been kept in a continual cryogenic state.
The doctor extended a long blue index finger from his four-fingered hand and entered the case file 10-digit code into the MWDR evidence archive, processing a request to retrieve the sample from suspended animation. After a moment, the polished metal top of the laboratory's central examination table slid aside, making way for a steam-shrouded glass box to rise up through the opening. Van Corvin was stunned.
The entire cryo block is black as pitch. Is the tissue contained inside excreting some sort of oil or organic resin?
Indeed, if the container had once been translucent, some kind of transformation was in the process of taking place inside. When the sample had been retrieved from the crime scene more than a year ago, just prior to the explosion of the Acropolis, it had been nothing more than a tiny tendril discovered clinging to a blade of grass beneath the lifeless form of Amber chromaticus. The initial assessment by Capellian authorities documented the forensic evidence as a common primal mudworm, literally present in great numbers on every landmass across the globe. The specimen would have been offhandedly discarded had it not been for the presence of a Neltatian criminalistics officer that bagged the creature after a sensor scan revealed that its minuscule body was made up of almost exclusively inert, yet unquestionably animate, dark matter. Ultimately, this one unusual scrap of proof, suggesting something far more sinister at work, had become Governor Van Corvin's last best hope to exonerate Neltet 6 of any wrongdoing.
The specimen is growing, sir. Still containable, of course, yet expanding, almost exponentially. The cryogenic state inside this containment chamber is appreciably slowing the creature's progress of expansion, but certainly not halting it.
All right,
the governor replied.
As of this moment, I am assigning to you a new directive. All of your findings to date have been well documented and safely archived, I assume?
The senior inspector nodded.
Of course it has, sir. Both here and off-world, down to the very last finite detail, including the presence of Delegate Chromaticus's DNA clinging to the exoskeleton of the worm.
Van Corvin inhaled sharply and cupped his narrow blue palm across his mouth. Finalizing his decision, he exclaimed,
"Very well. Of overriding importance, I want you to do whatever it takes to halt, or at the very least slow even further the process of growth of the sample. Kill it if you have to.
The senior inspector ran a gloved finger across the clouded black surface of the containment cube, stirring the wispy vapor that lingered like a mysterious veil that clouded a hidden truth.
Are you certain of this, Governor? This is the only such evidence of its kind. Is it your considered opinion that it will not be needed to present as proof during testimony in some future trial proceeding?
Van Corven examined the cube closely, watching the swirling mist as it drifted in two delicate columns around the inspector's fingertip.
I have an overwhelming sense of foreboding, Senior Inspector, that if we do not determine a way to combat this darkness, it may very well be, for all of us, a collective undoing.
Nix took full advantage of the time he had before and after tachyon conveyance to give Helix a complete briefing. Of course, the union of minds could not continue through the process of disassembly because the risk of molecular fusion between the two distinct life forms was far too great. Every individual was intentionally separated, either aboard ship or within the confines of a transference quay, to make sure that accidental gene splicing did not take place during the intricacies of cellular reassembly. The thought of this weighed heavily on Nix's mind as Helix started to retract his antennae from the old man's brainstem.
No offense, buddy, it's just that I have no particular interest in having an extra set of long, slender legs to walk around on.
I assure you, Captain, that the feeling is mutual.
Helix replied,
The thought of lugging around an extra human head upon my cephalothorax is worrisome to be sure.
Nix grinned slightly as he started waking up. Apparently, they were both quite grateful that their first accidental tachyon conveyance together hadn't resulted in much more than just a melding of minds.
I wish I could give you more to go on, old friend. No one knows exactly what this poor girl went through. It's highly likely she will not survive the shock of a telepathic link. Try not to appear too menacing. Maybe disguise yourself or something.
Just before removing his antennas and allowing Nix to awaken, Helix replied,
From what you have told me, the young woman has already seen and experienced far too much. I will assume a non-threatening form in her subconscious mind and endeavor to ascertain all that I can.
Nix opened his eyes and looked up into the radiant face of Queen Oberon.
Good morning, sleepyhead.
She chided.
I was wondering if you were going to go on snoring into your pillow all day long.
Nix chuckled dryly and then groaned as he sat up.
I took my time filling Helix in on the details of his mission.
Ophelia's smile faded.
I assumed as much,
she said.
The Trillnat only just now retreated down from your head and tucked itself beneath your shirt. How do you feel about his chances for success?
Nix pushed himself into a standing position and groaned again.
That all depends on Miss Alifair. I have no doubt that Helix can get in. Whether she can withstand the shock of his presence in her mind remains to be seen.
Ophelia sighed.
We must remain hopeful, I suppose, for the time being anyway. Get yourself a cup of coffee, Captain. We'll be landing at the Capellian spaceport in about 5 minutes.
When the Solari Dionysus pilot initiated his descent, he did so as instructed, landing not at a high-profile passenger gate, but rather setting down in the cluttered recesses of a very nondescript freight-loading platform, well out of the prying eyes of public scrutiny. A short time later, Ophelia and her unlikely assemblage arrived via a little-used staff entrance to the medical complex and up a lift to the 47th floor. The Capellan Intensive Care Suite was kept warm and dark by design, intended to maintain a consistent environment for those whose vulnerable life signs hung suspended in the balance between life and death. So, when Nix Orlan stepped up next to the careminder's station and politely asked to see one of the patients currently assigned to her care, a Rionian Dolphy named Clora Alifair, it caused a bit of a stir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Orlan. Miss Alifair is unresponsive and on life support,
the woman stated quietly.
No visitors are allowed at this time.
Nix leaned his elbows on the countertop and then winced. To the careminder's surprise, an oddly shaped deformity, what had at first glance seemed to be a hump on the man's broad shoulder, shifted position beneath his bemedaled flight jacket and repositioned itself on the opposite shoulder. Noticing the woman's odd expression of bewilderment, Nix attempted to explain.
Sorry about that, ma'am. It gets uncomfortable crouched in one place for too long. Thankfully, it's cold-blooded. Otherwise, having it clinging to my shoulder blade back there would be terribly irritating against my skin.
As Orlan stood there trying to dispel concern for his strangely abnormal posture, Queen Oberon stepped up beside him.
Please, my good woman, I implore you, we must be admitted at once. It is a matter of absolute necessity.
Instantly recognizing the face as the Empress of the known universe, the careminder bowed, disbelieving, in the presence of royalty, complete with a respectfully satisfactory curtsy.
Of course, Your Majesty. Right away. My sincerest apologies, milady. I had no idea. Please allow me to escort your party to the containment cubicle, where Miss Alifair is located. All I ask in advance is that you and your associates place one of these sterilization lozenges under your tongue before proceeding. The Reonian, I'm afraid, is just barely clinging to life. Admittance of any pathogen could prove lethal to her.
All but one of Ophelia's entourage, Nix's Trillnut symbiont, took a lozenge from the careminder and put them under their tongues as instructed, then followed after her through a protected passageway and into the inner sanctum of the suite, where the Reonian woman lay motionless and attached to all manner of life support devices. Upon closer examination, it was easy enough to see that her injuries were brutal and extensive. Arms bruised and broken in several places, face, neck and chest slashed repeatedly, and those only outward signs of the horrors she must have endured.
She was raped repeatedly, sodomized, beaten and choked.
The careminder exclaimed,
It is no small wonder that she has survived for this long.
Ophelia circled the cushioned platform upon which the Dolphy rested and lightly placed her fingertips on the woman's cheek.
Poor, poor girl,
she said somberly.
That this could happen here on the streets of Capella, upon my home world, is unacceptable. Completely, totally unacceptable.
All of Imperius Prime has undergone a stark transformation since the destruction of your Acropolis, milady.
The careminder lamented.
Sector Erotic, in particular, seems to be flourishing. Citizens casting off all notions of law and proper conduct. It's extremely upsetting.
A tear fell from Ophelia's cheek as she looked up at Orlan.
We can't let this happen, Nix. Not now, not ever. Not for one moment longer. We must understand why my kingdom is descending into ruin.
Nix reached out and offered her his hand. Ophelia caught hold of it in quiet desperation and let herself be pulled into a warm, protective embrace.
We will, Ophelia. I promise you. We will.
Turning to face the careminder, he said,
Would you give us a moment alone with the patient, ma'am? You have my word as an officer in the Queen's service. No harm will come to her. Please, just a moment. Maybe two.
The careminder considered the sincerity of his plea, and that he was obviously here to see that the Queen, her Royal Majesty, was well protected from harm. Whatever it was that they intended to do must be in the best interests of the Imperium.
I'll be monitoring her vital signs from my station. Should any harm come to her, I will know about it, and I will intervene. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I mean no disrespect. It is my job to care for those who cannot care for themselves.
Ophelia allowed a reserved, compassionate smile.
Your commitment to your work is admirable. I completely understand. This woman possesses knowledge pertaining to the attempt on my life. We may have a way to establish a telepathic connection with her and find out just how much she knows.
The careminder took a moment to consider Ophelia's words of assurance and nodded.
Very well, milady. You may proceed, though, as I said, I will know if she is in any distress.
Understood.
Ophelia responded.
And thank you.
Nix waited until the woman had crossed the distance back to the entrance of the suite, opened, and then securely closed the door behind her.
That was risky, telling her this isn't gonna hurt. I'm a native Niobean. I already knew what Trillnats looked like before the first one showed up in my nightmares. There's a distinct possibility that Helix could scare the unfortunate Miss Alifair to death.
Nix warned as he removed his jacket.
And that'll most assuredly register on the life support monitor.
We have no other choice but to try, Captain,
Ophelia replied. Then, looking back over her shoulder, she addressed Kindle Co. Blix.
Kindle, do you concur?
Ophelia's handmaiden nodded.
We have no leads, Your Majesty. None.
Then, addressing Nix, she said,
Captain Orlan, if your symbiotic arachnid has the ability to reach into this woman's thoughts, we may yet discover some clue that will lead us to the Queen's attempted assassin, to the reason why the light of her cherished stars is burning out. Please, proceed, Captain, if you will, before it is too late for Miss Alifair, for Her Royal Majesty, for the cosmos.
Plex completed his scheduled tasks shortly after nightfall and was on the way to his docking station to power down and recharge when something unusual caught his attention. Barely noticeable, really, no larger than an errant chunk of space rock captured by Niobe's gravity and on its way toward the sun to be incinerated. Plex's sensors were incredibly perceptive, perhaps unnecessarily so, interconnected to Orlan's deep space network and able to analyze and track even the most minute particles, not only in immediate proximity to Niobe, but quite literally anywhere in the galaxy. And so there it was, a tiny projectile glancing off the atmosphere of this fourth planet in the solar system and soaring by like a rock skipping across the surface of a lake to ultimately sink into the flaming depths of a star. Had Plex been imaginative, he might have considered the tragic nature of the event and lamented that this tiny cosmic traveler was about to meet an untimely end. Plex was not imaginative. In less time than it would have taken a human to blink, Nix's old automaton generated a three-dimensional picture of the object inside his neural optic system and analyzed its shape, size, and makeup from every conceivable angle. It was most certainly not a space rock. The outer shell was conical, a capsule approximately 0.55 meters in circumference that read as a containment vessel. A man-made chamber of some kind that was apparently transporting something inside. Plex examined what was a barely discernible heat signature and assembled a trajectory model that traced the object's origin through tachyon transmission back to none other than Imperius Prime.
Interesting,
the robot stated aloud.
A targeted projectile under intelligent control, on course to collide with the Niobean sun.
Plex pored over the substance data, attempting to determine what the thing was carrying, but couldn't get a clear read on it. The shell was pure dichiryllium, with traces of argon, residual surface gases that could have been part of some kind of launch propellant.
Dichiryllium is not an opaque substance to my sensors,
Plex voiced, somewhat confused.
There appears to be a containment field in place that is shielding the material held within from view. Troublesome, to say the least.
At the current rate of acceleration, Plex calculated that the capsule would most likely enter Niobe's corona in less than 48 hours, and then, unquestionably, burn up shortly thereafter, releasing or perhaps vaporizing whatever was inside.
Time enough, at least, to contact Captain Orlan on Imperius Prime and alert him as to the situation.
Helix entered very quietly into the frail, barely discernible neural activity of the Rionian Dolphy's tortured thoughts. One of the first abstract impressions he encountered was that of a vast hall of mirrors, presumably a limbo imagined or manufactured in her mind. A safe haven maze conjured by the woman's subconscious in defense against, and perhaps as an alternative to facing unthinkable reality. Situated at the absolute apex of this seemingly endless series of reflections, Helix saw himself.
Oh my no, this will never do,
he said, glancing at the mirrored series of eight-legged likenesses.
Something less liable to induce arachnophobia, I should think. Something familiar to her, a creature from her own planet.
Fortuitously, Helix's studies in Nix's observatory had touched upon Riona, the Dolphy's world, and so had provided him with a plethora of various non-threatening life forms to manifest. The Dolphinians were a race of strikingly beautiful humanoids, every last one of them female, a genetic trait making it absolutely imperative for the species to seek out and obtain a mate off-world, should they choose to do so. Clora Alifair, tragically, had selected Imperius Prime as a destination with potential suitors from every conceivable corner of the galaxy. Instead of finding love, she had found only wickedness and brutality. Helix looked around and noted that the dream was largely incomplete, some of the many mirrors vague and indistinct as a whisper, like being surrounded inside a dark vacuum filled with broken glass. A metaphor for Clora's equally broken spirit, a last, nonsensical grasp at holding on to something meaningful before letting go forever. The Dolphy's appearance was paramount to her, Helix surmised, thus this dreamscape shadowland of mirrors. Not just vanity in her case, but rather a character trait of all Rionians, beauty above all else. Helix sensed her presence. The dreamer was in here, somewhere close by and fading very fast. Never before had Helix felt such an incredible flood of emotion. Certainly not anything like this anyway, barely at all, from the predominantly logical hive mind of the Trillnats. His only familiarity with intense feelings of any kind having come from his contact with Orlan, neural synapses that were an irreverent blend of anger, fierce conviction and devotion to duty. In short, unwavering devotion to the Empress of Light, to the House of Oberon. Helix had learned a lot from his connection to the old star pilot, not the least of which being compassion and self-sacrifice. With this in mind, the Trillnat set about creating a persona for himself that would be as unthreatening as Rionianly possible for this emotionally tormented victim. Helix created his illusion at almost the same instant that a voice reverberated across his sensitive receptors.
You can't fix what is broken!
A woman's voice echoed in his mind.
It would be foolish of you to try.
Satisfied with his newly transformed appearance as it was reflected back to him 1,000 times over down the row of mirrors, the Trillnat responded,
I am not here to fix the damage, Miss Alifair. Would that I could. I am reaching out to you as an opportunity to play a key role in saving our universe from annihilation.
All at once, a silhouetted outline, apparently that of the Rionian Dolphy, appeared to Helix, manifesting as a facsimile in only one of the myriad mirrors that tapered off into infinity, the singular reflection and a potential indication that her life force was waning.
Why should I care?
She replied.
This universe is responsible for my undoing. This universe invited me in with open arms, nurtured me as a child, and then sent me out to be undone.
Helix's new persona, a Rionian Nepenthes, essentially a walking, talking indigenous Rionian plant, stepped over to the other side of the pane of glass upon which Miss Alifair's reflection appeared in reverse.
The creature that inflicted bodily harm upon you is not of this universe. We believe it to be a seed of entropy, a foot soldier for an invading force from elsewhere, perhaps another dimension, another universe entirely. Just as this minion of darkness has done these unspeakable things to you, so too is it actively seeking to bring about unending chaos to the cosmos. Somehow it must be stopped. It must not be allowed to rain down darkness upon us all.
What followed was silence. Helix didn't know if he'd gotten through to her, and she was now considering how best to respond, or if she was simply too weak to continue stringing words together in her mind.
Miss Alifair,
Helix called out into the dream.
Clora, can you still hear me?
The entity calls itself Triviot.
The Dolphy replied.
It is amorphous, Indistinct. I doubt it even possesses a natural state, though for some reason it initially revealed itself to me as an eyeball. A bloody red, disembodied eyeball. It was obsessed with sight, thus the incarnation of an eye, I suppose, with all things beautiful that it could possess, but never become, that it could take away and never, ever return.
Helix could feel wave after wave of intense sorrow, pain, and despair washing over him like a raging river of unchecked emotion. Perhaps the only remaining life force she had left to convey, to expel. The Trilnat pressed on, allowing his thoughts to pass into the last mirrored reflection of the once lovely Clora Alifair.
Please, my dear, while you still can, tell me everything you know about this creature that calls itself Triviad.
Wrapping his 8 cleverly disguised legs around the dreamer's dying thought projection, Helix held her gently in what appeared to her as his delicate leaves and branches, the illusion of the Rheonian plant, soft and comforting. After another long moment of silence, she said,
"It is called a Velgon. Not alive. At least not in the way that you and I are alive. It is darkness in its purest form, cold and black, like death. Dark matter. Velgons are interdimensional beings whose only objective is the unending expansion of their kind across every dimension, every universe. The one that took possession of my body, the abomination that made me do terrible things, identifies as female. She is reckless, impulsive, pure, evil. She has a brother who identifies himself as Than. She seems to have overwhelming disdain toward her sibling. She considers him to be weak and ineffective. Than has introduced an order of entropy here on Imperius Prime, a method by which countless scores of people have been indoctrinated and mutated into like-minded denizens to further support the conquest. His chapel of darkness has been constructed in the ashes of House Oberon, deep in the catacombs beneath the bombed-out tower of the Queen's Acropolis. It is from this place that these seeds of entropy plan to release the Horde. Horrific coagulations of animate dark matter that will then devour the last vestiges of energy and light in our universe.
Helix could sense that the essence of the Rheonian Dolphy was now all but gone. Miss Alifair obviously realized it as well.
"Tell me, my compassionate friend, what is your name?"
she asked. The Trilnat hugged her a little bit tighter and brushed what seemed to her to be a bundle of fragrant, flowering blooms across her cheek.
"Helix, my beautiful Dolphy. My name is Helix."
"Helix,"
she repeated, smiling.
"It is a good name. Strong and resilient."
And though his given name meant absolutely nothing to the Trilnat collective, in that moment it had become a treasured and lasting term of endearment to him.
"You are our salvation, Clora,"
he told her as she slowly closed her eyes, letting the last mirrored reflection in her mind begin to fade.
"Thank you, Helix,"
she managed to say,
"for giving my life meaning."
Koblix noticed her personal comm signal softly trilling in the pocket of her skirt, and so stood up from her chair in the intensive care suite and took several steps away so as not to disturb the Trilnat's hypersensitive state.
"This is Kindle Koblix. Please state your purpose."
Her greeting was somewhat dispassionate, but then the Queen's handmaiden had long ago become accustomed to a no-nonsense approach in matters of conversational etiquette. She had no reason to waste time being polite.
"Miss Koblix, this is Governor Supreme Silas Van Corvin of Neltet 6. I have an urgent matter I wish to discuss, either with you or Her Royal Majesty, Queen Oberon."
Kindle glanced over at the Dolphy and in particular at the Trilnat that was still attached to her head, its 8 long black appendages wrapped firmly around her face with antennae embedded in her neck.
"Yes, Governor."
Kindle acknowledged.
I'm afraid the Queen is currently observing a delicate procedure at the moment and cannot be disturbed. I shall see that your words are shared with her at the earliest opportunity. Please, continue.
Fortunately, Van Corvin was equally no nonsense, albeit somewhat pompous.
I wish to share our recent findings concerning a residual piece of trace evidence recovered from the crime scene of the Comaticus murders. Of course, the sample was retrieved just prior to the explosion by one of our investigators and was initially thought to be inconsequential. I assure you, Madam Koblix, it was not. This minuscule entity was, in actuality, a tiny piece of animate dark matter. In the span of time since the specimen was acquired, it has grown considerably, even as it has been kept frozen in a cryogenic state. Out of concern for the implications, I instructed my Ministry of Wrongful Death Research to focus their collective efforts on a way to destroy it, or at the very least reverse what appears to be a relentless expansion. I do this while knowing full well that the specimen remains the singular burden of proof that might exonerate Amber and Corona of any and all wrongdoing.
Kindle pressed for an answer.
Were you successful?
She asked.
Indeed we were.
The governor replied.
By application of dark energy resonance. Through the introduction of dark energy frequencies, we were able to create a disruptive field that ultimately rendered the creature inert, no longer posing any significant threat. In essence, lifeless, if life is even remotely applicable in this case.
Your findings may prove to be quite useful, Governor Van Corvin.
Kindle acknowledged.
In fact, most timely.
One caveat.
The governor warned.
Our success was limited to a small sample, no larger than the cryogenic containment chamber it was enveloped within. The energies that would be needed to disrupt or repel anything more substantial would be considerable, quite colossal.
Suddenly, from across the room, every life sign monitor attached to Chlora Alifair instantaneously flatlined in a cacophony of alert klaxons. In that same moment, Koblix saw the Trilnat release its grip around the woman's temples and hurriedly skitter back over to Orlan, wasting no time slipping itself beneath the collar of his coat. Shortly thereafter, the careminder burst into the room and sprinted to the Dolphy's side to see if the automated resuscitation efforts were able to successfully restart her heart. As Kindle anxiously observed the drama that was playing out, she re-engaged the conversation with Van Corvin.
Upload your findings to the Imperial mainframe, Governor, if you please. I am uncertain as of yet how your solution may apply, but I have the distinct feeling that both you and your talented research team might soon be under consideration for an Imperial Peace Prize, should we all manage to come out unscathed on the other side. Thank you, Silas.
You're most certainly welcome, Madam Koblix.
The governor said,
The data has been transferred with any luck. I'll see you on the other side.
Koblix smiled.
On the other side it is.
Back at the bedside, the careminder had already commenced the process of disconnecting Chlora Alifair from life support. Under any other condition, she might have requested an inquiry to determine if the Dolphy's unexpected visitors had been somehow responsible, at fault for her death. But then, the peaceful smile on the deceased Rionian's face spoke volumes.
Rest, Miss Alifair,
she said gently.
It is your due now.
Ophelia had not set foot on her planet of origin since the day her family's ancient acropolis had been destroyed. Now here she was, mere meters away, walking distance really, so close that she could see the majestic cliffs that jutted up above the Capellian skyline, the treasured acreage of her childhood, the long-held dominion of House Oberon. In the end, the temptation was far too great. The Queen was back, on Imperius Prime. Ever since the Solari Dionysus had come to rest at the Capellian spaceport, Ophelia felt an overwhelming inclination to make her way back across the city to set foot once again upon the hallowed grounds that to this day remain her birthright. And so, in the tragic moments during which time the Rheonian passed away, the Queen saw her opportunity to slip out of the room unnoticed, committing to make her brief, yet completely unprotected pilgrimage into the night. Ophelia had not anticipated the necessity for disguise during her return trip to Imperius Prime, and so now did not think it wise to enlist the convenience of a public transport and risk being recognized. The familiar sea breeze was chilled and gusty as she set off, as she remembered it, perhaps uncomfortably so for the average citizen to be walking around in, but then for her, a welcome change to the hot, dry Niobean winds she had become accustomed to for so long now. Ophelia's gown rippled around her as she walked briskly down the sidewalk that lined a central thoroughfare leading to the Imperial grounds. It was invigorating, even energizing, the very oxygen she was breathing filling her lungs with the air of her forefathers, emboldening her to take control and to take back all that she had lost. From timid step to confident stride, Ophelia traversed the distance in very short order, ultimately finding herself outside the dilapidated service gate granting access to the capital grounds. The condition of the once beautiful estate was far beyond dismal. Formerly pristine topiaries that lined the pathway leading into the gardens now gnarled and overgrown, their unkempt branches making the landscape appear shadowy and ominous, at least the foliage that still remained alive outside the blast radius. After pushing her way through the tangled bramble near the ruined entrance, the Queen then found herself standing on the brink of a gargantuan crater, a conical ravine that dropped off into untold depths, and whose distant opposing wall was so far across that it was beyond her field of vision.
Oh my God.
Ophelia exclaimed, disbelieving.
There is nothing left. Nothing at all.
The confidence she had felt earlier now suddenly drained in a single beat of her broken heart. Ophelia stumbled backwards and barely caught hold on a blackened tree branch to keep herself from falling across the ash that had once been her perfectly manicured lawn. Using all of her self-control to keep from weeping openly, the Queen started walking along the edge of the cliff to see what, if anything, remained as evidence that this shattered panorama had once been the undisputed center of the universe. As she rounded a large outcropping of rubble, dichiryllium shards of the Grand Acropolis, her gaze fell upon a rather unexpected sight, the remains of her treasured garden oasis, a place of beauty and solace that was once her escape from the rigors of her sometimes seemingly insurmountable responsibilities. The artificial tide pool was still intact, albeit charred and completely devoid of life, the only water left standing a sickening pool of collected rainfall at the bottom, littered with the foul-smelling remnants of her rare collection, exotic marine organisms that she and her father before her had brought back from every corner of the galaxy. Ophelia cupped her hand over her mouth in disbelief as she stepped out on the buckled cobblestone pathway and toward a single silhouetted outline, the stone likeness of King Ivis Mapalis Oberon. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes as she approached her father's effigy. Surprisingly, the statue had survived the brunt of the blast, having only shifted its position slightly, far enough away from the immediate vicinity of the explosion to have been spared from destruction. Tiny bits of loose rock and debris shifted beneath her feet as Ophelia approached and then stood silently, once again close by her father's side, in the only conceivable way she could be. His pose was unchanged, still pointing out all the wonders for his little Drox to explore. Those very wonders all gone now, vanished into a dark, empty hole in the ground, swept away like the childhood she yearned for, a magical place and time that could have gone on forever.
I'm so sorry, Father,
she said.
I've failed you. I've failed our kingdom.
Wanting more than life itself for Ivis to wrap her in his arms and lift her up to gaze out at an infinite horizon, Ophelia reached out her hand and gently draped it across one of the statue's broad shoulders. And like a miracle, a ghost summoned up and conjured here from the long-distant past. King Ivys gradually materialized before her and smiled.
"My child,"
he stated warmly,
"you have not failed. Failure only comes from having given up, from giving in to defeat. I know for a fact that you could no sooner give up and be defeated than you could let all the stars burn out in the cosmos. It's not in your nature. It's not who you are."
Even knowing full well that this was only a holographic apparition, Ophelia flung herself toward and then threw the disembodied projection to the other side.
Father,
She said, turning to face him.
the universe is dying and I am powerless to prevent it. All of the kind words of assurance and nuggets of wisdom you can impart cannot slow or stop the process of entropy. The cosmos, your cosmos, is fading away. What began as the annihilation of our home is destined to end in total, irreversible darkness and chaos.
Ivys's likeness shook his head and then took several steps closer to her.
"Ophelia Droxine Oberon, listen to yourself. You act as though all is lost."
Isn't it, Father?
Ophelia responded sharply.
"No, Drox,"
the hologram replied.
"It is not. You are the Empress of Light, my dear. You are the singular fire that cannot be extinguished by anyone or anything, no matter what. These are not simply kind words, nor idle nuggets of wisdom. I say this because I know you. I know your heart, a heart that burns with the passion of a red giant star."
Ophelia giggled unexpectedly.
Now you sound like Nix Orlan. With him it's my head, with you, my heart.
Ivys's likeness chuckled along with her.
Nix Orlan. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a very, very long time. Have you seen him recently? I could have sworn he was retired from the service.
Ophelia shrugged.
He was. I brought him back, reinstated him as my senior aeronaut. He's here with me now on Imperius Prime.
Ivys nodded approvingly.
I'm glad of that, Ophelia. I take comfort in knowing that he's still looking after the House of Oberon, moreover keeping my daughter safe, out of harm's way, protecting you now that I cannot.
You're still with me, Father,
the Queen said, smiling.
Deep down inside my red giant heart. I carry you with me there, always. And I'm sorry for sounding defeatist. I will find my way, for you, for the kingdom and for the cosmos. I shall not fail. I cannot fail.
The projection of King Ivys reached out toward his daughter, positioning his shimmering holographic hands as if they were carefully wrapped around hers.
That's my Drox. Unstoppable.
When all of this is over,
Ophelia told him,
I'll have you downloaded to someplace safe. Someplace where we can have more time together.
Ivys lowered his hands and turned away.
I shall anxiously await that time, my precious daughter. Though remember, the reality is that we have already enjoyed our moment in the sun, long, long ago. I am merely a reminder of what was. As much as I would like to be, I am not a part of your story anymore. That part of the adventure is up to you to write. I have no doubt your characters will all be bathed in glorious sunlight.
All at once, the image of Ivys turned and looked off at something beyond the wrecked tidal pool, a dim outline approaching the clearing next to the man-made shoreline.
We are not alone, my dear. I must go. Take care as you interact with this one. He is the seed of disaster you speak of. He doesn't know it, but I have seen and heard what he is doing, here beneath the remains of our home. Unfortunately, I have had no way to reach out and convey this information. That is, not until your singular fingerprint reactivated my mechanism. Even so, the computer upon which I am stored is no longer in contact with the Imperial network, presumed dead once again, I suppose. Oh well. I will share all that I know the next time we meet. Till then, beware. This entity already knows who you are.
Then Ivys leaned forward and pretended to kiss Ophelia on the cheek.
Farewell for now, my cherished daughter. I love you, more than all the stars in heaven.
Until we meet again, Father.
She replied.
Whether it is here or in the hereafter, I love you too in each and every one of your many incarnations.
The spectre of Ivis lingered for a moment longer and then dematerialized, just as the hooded, dark-robed figure stepped out from behind a dense black thicket of scorched trees.
Do these borrowed eyes deceive me?
Came an all-too-familiar voice from somewhere beneath the veil.
Queen Oberon, it is indeed an honor to welcome you back to Imperius Prime.
Well, well, well. My would-be religious zealot. I recognize your voice, Than.
Ophelia replied.
It wasn't all that long ago that you and your sister, disguised as Neltatian delegates, tried to sell me on the idea of creating an order of entropy. I'm assuming that in my absence, you have seen your plan through to completion, even without my permission or consent?
Of course,
the voice of Than responded.
And my words are now carried across all of what was once your grand Imperium.
Rather than attempting to move threateningly closer, Than's captive humanoid body sat down on a large chunk of debris across the way, and then continued speaking. For the moment at least, he didn't seem actively interested in inflicting bodily harm upon her. Perhaps he was so sure of himself that he assumed Queen Oberon was already doomed.
Your species is gullible, easily influenced. In fact, they believe anything you tell them as long as you vow to give them what they want in return, what they believe they need. Once it is too late, I give them an alternative, an opportunity to change their minds. In the end, life forms native to this universe will walk blindly into darkness once they are convinced that the darkness is good, that the darkness is what they need to be set free. These disciples will live on to usher in a new universal order.
From beneath his robe, the ominous figure proceeded to produce a mask, an emotionless metallic face, and held it up for the Queen to see.
I can deliver you to the other side, Your Majesty. Give you a place of prominence in this new reality.
Ophelia scoffed.
No thanks. I have no desire to rule in hell. I do, however, want my kingdom back. To that end, I shall fight to stop you. I am most certainly not one of your minions of darkness, Than. I am the Empress of Light.
That's very theatrical, Your Highness.
Than mused.
A consummate performance. Impressive. A pity that we each represent such opposing philosophies concerning the nature of darkness and light. We could have shared a stage together.
What good is the play if its actors can never be seen, and for the most part have their voices silenced? I don't deliver my lines from behind a mask, and I'm not entertaining the death of untold innocent lives to punctuate my epilogue. Why not step into the light and show me who you really are? You can't, can you? Or perhaps you are simply unwilling to illuminate the truth. Either way, hiding behind someone else's persona is a pretty blatant act of cowardice in my book. I haven't figured out your chameleon-like ability to assume the identity of others. Not yet, anyway. I don't know how you're extinguishing the stars either, but I will find out and I will stop you. Reverse the process. Upon that, you can be sure.
You will try,
Than retorted.
Though due in no small part to my sister's impulsive behavior, your imminent demise will come much sooner than expected. Enjoy your final hours in the light of day, Queen Oberon. The sun is setting, once and for all.
Than, or whoever it was that he was possessing, slowly stood and started casually walking away, apparently unconcerned that Ophelia had drawn her plasma pistol from its holster and had it aimed directly at his head.
Take your best shot, Queen Oberon. I'm certain that your target has been acquired. Keep in mind, however, that you'll only be eliminating my captive vessel with your kill setting, not me. Would you like to add murder to your list of diplomatic accomplishments? Even if you did somehow manage to destroy me, it would not stop what is coming.
The figure then stepped off into the charred tangle of dead foliage and gradually disappeared into the distance beyond the rim of the crater. Ophelia returned the sidearm to her utility belt and then tapped on her wrist-mounted comm.
Nix. Kindle, can you hear me?
Yes, milady,
came Koblix's reply.
Are you all right? We've been worried sick.
I'm sorry,
the Queen responded.
Yes, my dear, I'm fine. Is Nix with you? I have some very interesting information to impart to the both of you.
Orlan is currently sleeping with that god-awful Trillnat clinging to his forehead, apparently receiving a full report from the contact with Miss Alifair. I am hopeful that he shall be awakening shortly. Will you be joining us for a debriefing?
Ophelia took one last look at her father's statue and sighed.
I'm on my way. Let's rendezvous back at the Solari Dionysus. I'm quite sure we all have much to discuss.
The Velgonian dark matter projectile penetrated the corona of Niobe and reached a point of no return. Dichiryllium, the single most resilient material known to man, reaches superheated criticality and begins the process of subatomic repulsion and disassembly at approximately 3 million Kelvin. The targeted sun was providing more than enough fire and brimstone to incinerate both the shell and the containment field inside, ultimately releasing the material held captive at the core. For Than and Triviad, the genie was finally out of the bottle. Once this animate dark matter cocktail had been exposed to the stuff of the stars, it initiated a twofold process: to absorb any and all energy that came into contact with it, and to attract all other surrounding dark matter from this universe like a sponge, a strange, unnatural attraction more powerful than gravity itself. All of this was unfolding, at least at first, as an unobservable phenomenon. In a sense, the moment of truth was somewhat anticlimactic to the naked eye, at least during the seconds following the initial release. The moment may have come and gone completely unnoticed. Thankfully, Plex noticed. No catastrophic energy loss or release, no stellar collapse, just a subtle difference in the sun's ultraviolet light emission. A strange displacement of hue, a spectral shift like a tinted filter gradually wrapping itself around the sun. It was a precursor to something far, far worse. A dark matter snowball rolling downhill across the universe with nothing to stand in the way. In the wake of this unimaginable event, a destabilizing fold in the fabric of space started to emerge. In fact, Niobe's gravity well, closing in upon itself, and in the process creating a warp bubble that would inevitably burst to become a conduit, a broken pipe to further flood the cosmos with even more animate dark matter. A perfect storm of dark energy to wash away the lingering dregs of light that remain. Indeed, Plex noticed everything. Bringing his formidable powers of observation to bear, the robot watched the event unfolding in real time by way of his satellite uplink, directing the automated sensor probes in orbit around the sun to capture and transmit detailed data back to him for analysis. When the interdimensional opening first appeared along the leading edge of the distorted gravity well, Plex was already gathering a highly detailed picture, documenting a missing puzzle piece to the Velgonian invasion, a glimpse through a window into a dark matter netherworld. Fully capable of multitasking on the fly, Plex continued his data-gathering efforts while at the same time making his way out to the flight line where the pair of formidable starfighters were safely stored beneath sandstorm-proof tarpaulins. If his logical assessment of the situation was correct, the tachyon drive nacelles would need to be uncovered at once and a plugs-out pre-flight check conducted in preparation for Ophelia and Nix to go to war. The briefing room aboard the Solari Dionysus was one of the more spacious chambers aboard ship, and yet an intense, unspoken air of enclosed spaces seemed to linger among those in attendance for the shared discussion. Anxious to get the conversation underway, Ophelia looked across the conference table and directed her gaze toward Orlan.
Nix, what was Helix able to ascertain from the Rionian? Anything of consequence?
Quite a bit, as it turns out.
The old man responded,
It seems that a creature known as a Velgon was able to take possession of her body and then function within said body, alongside and more or less in tandem with Miss Alifair. The entity somehow managed to take complete control of the Dolphy's nervous system, leaving her in some kind of semi-conscious state, during which time she was able to see, feel, and sense everything that was being done to her, and by her, all the while powerless to intervene. Near as I can tell, this Velgon, held her captive in this helpless capacity purely out of narcissistic glee, turning a vulgar and violent intimate encounter into a horrific threesome with an unwilling and unconsenting victim literally caught in the act. According to Helix, the Rionian mentioned that this intruder had a name. Triviad, I think.
Ophelia and Kindle glanced at each other knowingly as Nix continued.
A Velgon apparently doesn't have a native state. They are shapeless, formless. Although, to exist here in our universe, they adapted a primitive physical persona, allowing them to inhabit other living beings, in a sense becoming puppet masters, pulling the strings via the central nervous system. A symptom of possession seems to be a reddening of the eyes, a telltale sign. For that matter, a disembodied blood-red eyeball seems to be the creature's aforementioned persona. This Velgon, Triviad, she's obsessed with beauty. Her own, apparently. She told Helix that Triviad had specifically targeted a Rionian Dolphy for that reason alone.
Nix paused for a moment and then looked over at Ophelia.
Apparently, Triviad has a brother who identifies himself as Than. From what I understand, this second Velgon has created a temple for some sort of cult, a religion of darkness or something.
The Order of Entropy.
Ophelia interrupted.
Upon the very grounds of my broken citadel.
Yes.
Nix confirmed.
I know, Nix.
Ophelia replied.
I've spoken to Than. I encountered him while exploring the remains of the broken ramparts. And...
The Queen added.
I discovered something else. My father's effigy is still intact. Not only the chiseled statue in my garden, but the computer upon which his consciousness and engrams are stored.
Ophelia smiled.
He remembers you, Nix. He told me he was happy that you were looking out for me.
Orlan sighed, doing his best to fight back emotion.
Your dad was one of a kind, Beetlejuice.
He said.
Ivis loved you. You were the light of his life.
The feeling is mutual, Nix, I assure you. Then, and now. Don't get me wrong. I know he's gone. Yet I cannot discount artificial intelligence in this case. I believe my father's spirit still lingers, whether in a shimmering holographic projection or in the light of the stars above. In a sense, he can yet fight for our cause. His effigy has been watching the rise of Than's Order of Entropy, seemingly from inception to this very moment. He has seen and archived every conceivable detail of the Velgonian plan to overtake this universe. We need to find some way to tap into his stored knowledge. It will teach us much.
The Queen's brow furrowed.
We need to know how Than and Triviod are extinguishing the stars. If we knew that, then perhaps we have a fighting chance to stop what is happening.
Ophelia's frustration was evident in her expression, at least until Kindle spoke up.
Perhaps we do, milady. Governor Supreme Silas Van Corvin of Neltet 6 has provided us with a potential method by which we might be able to neutralize these elements of animate dark matter. Apparently, a small piece of trace evidence taken from the Neltatian delegate crime scene has become a particularly useful laboratory specimen. A little piece of Velgonian anatomy. It seems that the sample has been growing, even in a cryogenic environment. Governor Van Corvin then tasked his researchers to focus on a method to halt the expansion of the entity. The solution has since been made available on the Imperial network. Encrypted for your eyes only, of course, Your Majesty.
Before the conversation had concluded, Orlan spoke out once again.
One last item of immediate concern. I received a message from Plex a short while ago. It seems that he is tracking a small, unidentified projectile launched from the Imperial grounds here on Imperius Prime. It is on course and set to impact on the Niobean sun. Based on what we now know, there's little doubt that it's a precursor to yet another Velgonian event. I suggest we set course for Niobe. Pick up the Ionian fighters along the way, and then see if the Queen and I can blast the little bastard out of existence.
A soft tone sounded from a speaker in Koblix's console. followed by a synthesized voice.
5 minutes to tachyon conveyance.
Way ahead of you, Captain Orlan.
Koblix exclaimed.
Our course is already charted. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears as if we have a potential plan in the works. Shall we prepare for battle, milady?
Indeed.
The Queen stated boldly,
It is time to take back the Imperium.
Plex was a robot, not an aeronaut. Of course, he had full access to all of the appropriate flight data and simulation training. It's just that when you live and work with one of the most skilled and highly decorated star pilots in the Imperium, the opportunity to climb in the cockpit and sit behind the controls of a spaceship had simply never presented itself. That is, not until now. Now he was carefully guiding Nix's starfighter Ilios up through Niobe's stratosphere, all the while referencing and assimilating the vessel's Imperial Training and Operating Procedure Standardization Manual, ITOPS for short. As Plex's onboard neurocore brain absorbed every flight instruction as outlined in the text, some of which written by none other than Nix Orlan himself, the robot placed the Ilios on an intercept course with the widening interdimensional opening and then tapped his comm.
Captain Orlan, this is ISS Ilios. Plex here.
There was a brief delay as his message transmitted and was received, light years away, aboard the Solari Dionysus, as it readied for a spatial tachyon jump from Imperius Prime. Once the connection had been established, Orlan's distant voice resonated through the starfighter's cockpit speaker.
Hey buddy, what's up? Running diagnostics on Ilios?
No, Captain.
Plex replied.
I am currently at the controls of the spacecraft, on course toward a Lagrange point in space, 1 million miles out from what was once our Niobean sun.
Surprise and confusion was evident in Orlan's response.
Wait, what? Let me get this straight. You are flying into space? In my ship? Plex, do you know how to fly?
Yes, Captain, I do. Or should I say I'm currently learning on the fly. No pun intended.
Orlan's voice was tinged with alarm.
All right, Plex, listen to me. Plot yourself a return trip back down to the planet's surface. Helix and I are on our way to Niobe with the Queen and her entourage. We're ready for tachyon conveyance right now. You need to sit tight and wait till we arrive. If there's a dire situation unfolding there, you can't face it by yourself in that antiquated bucket of bolts. Stand down, my friend. That's an order.
Plex's resolve was unshakable. His reply was defiant.
Not this time, Captain. An intradimensional portal has opened near Niobe, precipitated by the torpedo that was launched from Imperius Prime, the object I informed you of earlier. My readings indicate that the formation of this hole in the sun's gravity well has been intentionally designed to grant entry into our universe for some kind of gargantuan dark matter worm. By its outward appearance, that is, a segmented entozoon of unimaginable size that even now seems to be drawing in and absorbing streams of hydrogen and helium from our star. I estimate that at the current rate of decline, Niobe will be completely extinguished within a matter of minutes.
Dear God.
Nix exclaimed.
Niobe? Yet another burned out cinder? What about the planet, Plex? Is it in any imminent danger? Is there a nearby safe quadrant that we can pinpoint for our tachyon jump?
I'll transmit a set of safe coordinates.
The automaton responded dutifully.
And Captain, let me point out that an attack on this entity using one or both of your Ionian fighters would no doubt be a futile effort. There is a 99.99% chance that your ion cannons will prove utterly ineffective. We must understand more about these invaders and their origins if we are to effectively build a defense to combat them. It is for this very reason that I intend to fly the Ilios into and through this dimensional portal, to ascertain a thorough understanding of the alien intelligence there and why it is hell-bent on assimilating our universe.
Nix was dumbfounded.
Plex, are you out of your ever-loving neurocore noggin? You can't do this. You could be nosediving straight into a singularity. You'll be destroyed.
We'll all be destroyed if I don't.
The robot replied.
And besides, I'm only a machine, Captain. In the end, built and programmed to serve mankind. Please, Nix, don't order me to alter course. Allow me to carry out my prime directive. No one knows what lies ahead, Nix. An alternate dimension or merely a nebulous, unknown future. Perhaps as a mechanical device, I won't even be considered a threat to the Velgons. For that reason alone, I am the logical choice to make this crossing.
This time, the delay was not a symptom of distance. Orlan was obviously considering the robot's request, torn somewhere between friendship and the cold, hard reality of Plex's intended plan, and the undeniable fact that it made perfect sense.
Captain, are you still there?
Plex asked.
Yeah, Plex, I'm still here. Permission granted, buddy. Straight on through to the other side, as they say. You give 'em hell. You hear me? If you don't come back from this, I'm gonna chase you down from hell to breakfast and kick your corroded metal ass when I catch up. Are we clear? Can I get an affirmative?
Plex tipped his head knowingly, fully aware by now that Nix's attempts at intimidation were almost always in jest. Not once had the old star pilot ever followed through on his threat and kicked Plex's articulated gluteus.
Affirmative, Captain. Loud and clear. Tell Drox I'm off to save her kingdom from destruction, will you? Tell her that I'm proud to call her my friend. It's quite an honor for a robot to be friends with the Empress of the known universe.
Make me proud, my friend.
Came Ophelia's voice over the comm.
Find out all you can. We shall be anxiously awaiting your return. Nix and I, of course, and someone else who will be looking forward to a potential rendezvous. Kindle Koblix.
If a robot could be considered capable of emulating an emotional response, whether it be simulated or genuine, Plex's optic sensors glowed brighter than ever before as he contemplated the possibilities.
In that case,
he voiced with an added inflection,
rest assured, I'll be back. Not even a Velgonian worm can prevent me from being in attendance for such a reunion.
Ophelia giggled.
I thought not.
She said warmly,
just a little extra motivation to bring you back safe and sound.
Thank you, Drox.
Plex replied.
And farewell to you all, at least for now.
So long, Tin Cup.
Orlan said to him,
I'll catch you on the flip side. Somewhere between here and there, wherever that might be.
Goodbye, Captain.
Plex closed the channel then and adjusted his trajectory so that the Ilios would approach the conduit across the center of what his sensors identified as an event membrane, a shimmering iridescent barrier marking the entrance and most likely stabilizing the leading edge of the opening. Passing beyond a gravitational sheath where the forces from both dimensions clash and interact, Plex rocketed straight on into the unimaginably wide, gaping gullet of an emerging dark matter behemoth. Almost immediately, the Ilios encountered a violent buffeting as waves of turbulence rolled across the vessel's fuselage, a telltale signature of both normal and dark matter interacting.
Crossing enemy lines, Captain.
Plex's final message stated,
It's a good thing I'm not afraid of the dark. It's a good thing I'm not afraid of the dark. It's a good thing.
From a poem by American Army General George S. Patton. So as through a glass and darkly, the age-long strife I see, where I fought in many guises, many names, but always me. And I see not in my blindness what the objects were I wrought, but as God rules o'er our bickerings, it was through his will I fought. So forever in the future shall I battle as of yore, dying to be born a fighter, but to die again, once more.
The war between darkness and light has begun. A war waged not between two rival factions of the Queen's Imperium, but rather a conflict to decide the fate of the very stars themselves. The victor, as yet to be determined, a conqueror, to stand bathed in glorious sunlight or revel in starless night, to walk bravely into the dawn or stagger blindly into darkness, breathing one final breath of thin air.
Episode 31 of the Thin Air podcast anthology, Imperium Chapter 2, The Empress of Light, was written for audio by R.J. Lonsdale and John Milas. The program was produced, directed, narrated and told by R.J. Lonsdale. The voice of the storyteller was performed by Valentino Nisith. The voice of King Ivis Mapalis Oberon was performed by Brian Graydon. Ophelia Droxine Oberon by Ella Hewitt, Nix Orlan by Jake Lockley, Plex by Lucifer Tyrell, Helix the Trillnat by Reginald Kane, Kindle Koblix by Katie Brown, Than by Drew Adler, Triviad by Cassandra Stoyer, Clora Alifair, The Rionian Dolphy by Zelda Amir, Silas Van Corvin by F.C. Nicholas, The Neltation Senior Inspector by Frederick Surrey, The Capalian Careminder by Odette Zander, The Trillnat Guardian by Jonathan Dole, Triviad's John by Michael Payne, The Solari Dionysus Pilot by George Devine, and The Starship Comvoice by AI Assistant. Audio production for this Thin Air episode by R.J. Lonsdale of Flyby Studios. Music compositions used in this episode include The Door by Vivek Abhishek, Artemis and Celestial by Scott Buckley, For Tomorrow and What Happens When We Die by Sav FK, Eternal Dawn and Fallen Empires by Fuzzek, Mongolian Throat Singing by Musical Discoveries, Sancta Tenebrae by Maya's Music, Mars Colony by Psyops, No Copyright Music, Oscuro by COAG Music, 7 Abandoned Theaters by CJT Dark Soundscapes, an ambient bass and guitar soundscape, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0. This has been an R.J. Lonsdale Flyby Studios presentation. Queen Ophelia Droxine Oberon and Nix Orlan will return in Chapter 3 of Imperium. Entropy's End. For now, farewell.